Praise the Lord. The reason I'm smiling is because of all that I heard after last week. Many were confused and many were tongue-tied but did not die. And many understood. Some only, I think very few understood. It is the grace of God that will make us understand. Also, practical experience also will help us understand. In other words, the more self we have, the more we will understand. And so perhaps that's why we understood. Now, we are not going into the 12th stone. Instead, we will continue what we studied last week, for there is more we must study. And so may God really open our eyes, even tonight, as we were studying last week. Perhaps we can go quickly over what we studied last week. We studied last week about the stone, the 11th stone, the Jacinth. We studied about the stone and we understood it meant the righteousness of God, or divine righteousness. And when we stand before God, the highest standard there of the saint would be where they have nothing of their own and everything that they have is from Christ. We have many things which are our own, many from the devil, and very little from Christ. But we must come to a place where nothing of the devil. Jesus had the testimony. He said, the prince of the world cometh, he hath nothing in me. At the same time, Jesus had nothing of self, but he was the fullness of the Father. So he could say, he that had seen me, he is not seeing me, he is seeing the Father. He was so beautiful, perfect. Even so, when we stand before God, we will not have any righteousness of our own, but we will have Jacinth righteousness, which is the righteousness of God, the goodness of God alone. We will have nothing to boast of. We will have nothing to be proud of. We won't have attained anything by the working of the flesh or the self or the striving and self-effort. But we will have received everything by grace. And this is not a thing we can easily understand. You can't just understand it immediately. Some people say it was confusing, but let me tell you, it was very confusing for me. And the only reason why I was able to understand is because God showed me from my own life. We understand only when we start studying who we are in the light of God's glory. We must study who we are in the light of God's glory, not anything else. Then, like Isaiah, we will be able to say, woe is me. Dear children of God, we studied last week about Saul and David, and of course, dear brother Lawrence and dear sister Laura, and we understood so much about trying to attain the goodness of God, gaining points and favor from God and the servants of God. And when we have attained something, maybe the servants of God are pleased with us and say, you're really changing. We do feel encouraged, and that is not wrong. But sometimes we go into and take the exit into man-pleasing. And thereafter we think, as long as people are happy, leaders are happy, servants of God are happy, parents are happy, as long as we can get a good name from people, I'm fine. But let us always remember, Isaac loved Esau. He loved Esau because of the ability and talents. He could produce some good food. He could hunt well. He could do so many things. But God says, Esau have I hated. So it is possible for us to be loved and praised and honored by people. And we could be totally away from God. So dear children of God, we must therefore understand that there is something that we have not understood. And we must therefore seek to know more the truth about ourselves. Jacinth is all about God, but we will also understand about ourselves. So this evening, I want to speak more about this evil self, not Jacinth, not this beautiful stone, not what we should put on, but what hides behind it. We think we are Jacinth, we think we are putting on the stone, but there is something very, very evil behind the Jacinth stone. Something very evil. The evil I, the self. This I is the origin of everything. We can see the origin right in the heart, in the center of Lucifer. Of course, in his name also, I is right there in the middle. I is right there in the middle of sin. The I is so strong, it does not allow us to progress in our spiritual life. It is very evil. Dear children of God, Lucifer promoted the I, the thought of I. The anointed cherub had this feeling, I. How this I began is called the mystery of iniquity. Very evil. Until then, the thought I never ever occurred in heaven. Millions perhaps of years had passed, and the thought was never I. There was no I at all in heaven. The thought was always God, you. I never was there. But when all of a sudden a speck of dust decided to step aside and reflect on oneself and wish it could be like God, I want to be as God. I want to be as the Most High. I want to be like God. Now remember, that's not the I want to be like Jesus desire we have. That is not I want the character of God, but I want the power of God. I want the position of God. I want the praise that God gets. And I want to have people submitting to me. I enjoy that. I enjoy having people under me. I enjoy telling people, now you obey me. I got power. That I began in heaven. That I began as a mystery. And that I instantly was cast into hell. That's why this I is very, very evil. Dear children of God, this I is elusive. You can't find it. You can't see it like the Loch Ness monster. It hides. It hides and will not be seen. Search for it and you will not find it. Search for it and you will declare in the end that it is not there. There is no I. In fact, if you listen carefully or see properly, I is telling you, I am not there. It is evil. It is dangerous. This I is the evil destroyer. This I is your guide to hell. And if you do not deal with this I, by letting God deal with that I, then I will go to hell. Dear children of God, Satan, he controls this I. He is full of I. As John Milton in Paradise Lost, he says, Satan was cast down and he will have no repentance, because even in hell, he says, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. So full of I, so full of himself wanting to rule. Therefore let me warn all those who have this desire to rule, that desire is not from God. Wherever Jesus is, you see the picture of a servant, never a king. When they tried to make him king, he ran away. The desire to rule, even to have one person under you, that is I. Now, this evil enemy, he made the mistake where he wanted to be as God. And then, when he fell, he knew now he fell. Next, he wants man to fall. In the Garden of Eden, in the period of innocence, there was no I. But what happened? What was the first thing that the serpent told Adam and Eve? You shall be as God. The whole story is, now look here, I wanted to be like him, and I have fallen. Now, I know one day you will be like him, but I don't want you to be like him in character. I want you to desire to be like God in power and knowledge. You will be as God. He put that temptation in him, before him. And what happened? Man also fell. Neither Adam nor Eve had the least inkling as to what Satan was leading them to. And finally, they fell. And families tumbled after that. Generations, nations, and kingdoms tumbled and fell prey to this evil eye, this serpentine eye, this diabolic eye, this hellish, fiendish eye. This eye now rules, this eye dominates. Nations and kingdoms all have been under the influence of eye. Nobody can escape the eye. It has claws and tentacles. It's like an octopus. You try to escape one tentacle and the other grabs you. You realize you're proud. Pride is a tentacle. You push that away and thank God you're humble, and that's pride again. You don't know how to get out of this eye. Dear children of God, this eye is the whole cause of the world's state today. Now, as nations tumbled and fell prey to eye and no one could escape the eye, one theory that the world saw and the world held, adhered to and believed was called the geocentric theory. Now, the geocentric theory is that the earth is the center of the universe and everything else, including the sun, rotates around the earth. Now, that should make sense to us, because if you look naturally, go out into the field, sit there, can you tell me that the earth is moving? Do you think the earth is rotating or revolving? You can't make out any movement. But you can see that the sun is moving. So if we look at it naturally, the earth is the center and everything goes round the earth. That's called the geocentric theory. Geo, earth, is in the center. Now this geocentric theory was a very complicated theory. Science became complicated. They could not understand many things because it was not the right theory. Until the 16th century, when Nicholas Copernicus, he brought out another theory. The Polish astronomer, he brought out the theory that the earth is not the center, but the sun is the center, the heliocentric theory. He said, why are we thinking that the earth is static? The earth does not move. The earth is the center. Instead, just imagine the sun is the center. And all the planets and stars, everything, not the stars, all the planets are revolving around the sun. The sun is the center, which means, let us humble ourselves. Even our earth also is going around the sun. Now, this was his theory. And if that were true, much of the complicated things would become simple. In the 17th century, Galileo, an Italian astronomer and physicist, he accepted the Copernican system. He accepted this, but when he did that, the Catholic Church, which supported the geocentric theory, rejected him and threatened him by the Inquisition to torture him to death. So he had to recant and he had to put aside all his theories. And thereby, everybody still thought the geocentric theory is the real truth. Now, can you see the evil eye in that? I, the earth, the planet where we live. Or let's just bring it down to our life. I am the center. and everything revolves around me. And somebody comes and says, why do you be the center? Why not the Son? Why not the Son of God? Why not Jesus? And why can't we humble ourselves and just become one amongst the others? Become a nobody. Become just one in the crowd and be just one of the many people spinning around Jesus. Let him be the center. You can see that triggered up so much enmity. Dear children of God, this doctrine of I, this evil I, is all pervasive. It spreads everywhere. Don't think it has stopped. Today, it is spreading even more. But it's very clever. It hides so that you don't recognize, in the form of humanistic philosophy, humanistic teaching. All children in school, the curriculum they have, what they are taught every day, has a lot of humanistic philosophy. Humanism, I'm not going to speak much of it, but humanism is a religion today. They have the humanistic Bible. They have their God. Now, who is the humanistic God? I. What the humanist says is, for example, one Paul Kurtz, he's a humanist. Now, what he said was, no God, no deity can save us. We must save ourselves. We must save ourselves. No one else can save us. What does humanism do? Humanism exalts man and denies God. Today, humanism has infiltrated, this philosophy has infiltrated everything. Government servants, teachers, ministers, most of them are humanists. God-denying humanists, and they have 5 tenets. First of all, atheism, which says there is no God. Secondly, evolution, which says your grandfather was a monkey. Now, that sounds funny, but dear child of God, do you know what evolution is? Again, there is no God. God did not create us. We just came, bang, and we appeared. And thirdly, amorality, which says there is nothing called sin. There is nothing like sin. What you feel is wrong is sin. And what you feel is right is not sin. You decide what is right and what is wrong. Nobody else can tell you what is right or what is wrong. You can decide for yourself. That is why in the world today, if you consider what happens in your schools, in your colleges, if you tell another person he's wrong, they'll immediately say, you're judging. You can't judge. You should not judge. Why? Because you're telling another person he's wrong. You can't do that. But the very fact that they tell you you are judging, they are judging you. But this is the spirit in the world, immorality, where there is no more right and wrong. There is no God who can tell us what is right and what is wrong. You are your God. So you can see every tenet is a God-denying tenet. Fourthly, autonomy. Human autonomy of freedom, sovereignty. You are the center, and everything spins around you. You decide everything. And your life will spin around you. Now, if these 4 are the tenets, then what is the 5th tenet? It's globalism. And that is exactly what is the system of the Antichrist. We are very, very near the coming of the Antichrist. All these things are found in the world today. That evil eye that began in the mystery of the former eternity, that evil eye today is spreading. It's spreading. Today, humanists, they hate the Bible. They hate Jesus. It is humanism that wants to remove Bibles from hospitals and remove the name Jesus. We can see everywhere, Jesus should not be mentioned. People must not be offended. People become the center. People's feelings become the center. Jesus and his feelings are no longer important. This evil eye factor now is ruling the world. It wants to rule every home. It wants to rule every individual. And this evil destroyer eye, he wants to take you to hell. There is only one way out. Face the I, face the truth, recognize it. But the moment you recognize the I gets discouraged. See, the I somehow wants to escape punishment, but we have to be hard on the I. And let's therefore study this I a little more. One of the first signs of the coming of the Lord is I. In fact, it's so evil that it is called perilous in the Bible. St. Paul says, perilous times are going to come in the last days. The first sign is I. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and read the first verse.
This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come.
In the last days perilous times shall come. What is the first of those perilous things?
For men shall be lovers of their own selves.
Men shall be lovers of their own selves. Or the first sign of the coming of the Lord is self-love. Self-love. What is self-love? Where we love God, we love ourselves more than we love God or love man. I becomes so important. Self-love, promoting oneself, promoting one's own desires, fulfilling one's own plans. And this self-love leads to self-pleasing. And there are some people who are so engrossed in themselves, they become very lonely. They live by themselves, they live alone, and they will go into a lot of secret sin because of self-love. I don't want to speak too much about that. But self-love leads people to a lot of sin. But that sin will not involve others. It will involve only themselves because they are full of self-love. Dear children of God, this self is not the problem of the sinner. This self is not the problem of the sinner. This self is the problem of Satan. It is the problem of the sinner. It is the problem of the new soul. It is the problem of the saved. It is the problem of the new believer. It is the problem of the old believer. It is the problem of the servants of God. It is the problem of all the saints except God. Selfless God. Everybody has this problem. But why is self being brought under the microscope and dealt with like this? Because I want you to understand something. Sinners and, say, pop idols, sports people, all of them, they compete with each other. They compete with each other. But the self competes with God. The self wants to take the place of God. Remember, David is the son of God and Saul is the self. And Saul will not bow down before David. He may bow his head, but he will not leave the throne. That is why I say self is so evil. And everything that comes from self is also dangerous and evil. Now, self is something very hard. Very, very hard. Now, I've got so much to tell you, and I don't think I'll be telling it to you in the right order. But whatever I've put together, I will try and put it across. It does not matter what order. As long as we can all die, God will give us a good funeral, and Jesus can live in our place. Self is something very hard. Now, self has different branches. The problem of self in my life may not be the problem of self in your life. My problem can be self-pity, where I feel all the time sorry for myself and sorry that others are not feeling sorry for me. But there can be another person. The problem is not self-pity. There are some people who hate self-pity. But their problem with self could be anger, intolerance. They can't bear other people at all. So self has different branches. Self is not an octopus. It's like several octopuses being Siamese twins. Well, they can't be twins, then I don't know. Octuplets or whatever. So you can see one head, but 1,000 arms. Can you imagine that creature? That goblin creature? Look in the mirror. The self is hard. Now take for example, just this one nature I mentioned, self-pity. Now, self-pity seems to be a soft thing, but I tell you, it's very, very evil. It's very hard because, now let me give you an example. There's one particular sister I know who always said, no one cares for me. No one can feel my pain. Nobody knows what I go through. Now, these statements that we make, it comes only from self-pity. But the problem is, this sister and so many others feel that it is not from self. So she was looking around for pity. At one point, she looked at me. And when I said, sister, that is self-pity, you know what she said? Brother, even you? When she said, even you, she was making an appeal to myself. I should have thought, oh no, she expected something from me. I shouldn't have said that. I said, sister, I said the truth and I will say it again. She shook her head and said, nobody can understand me. The next time she came to me for self-pity, I said, sisters, before I could open my mouth, you say, now you're going to tell me self-pity. Brother, it is not self-pity. But she continued to pity herself, and she pitied herself and pitied herself until she got into so much problem. Unfortunately, no matter how big the problem is, that pity, self-pity, in the middle of all that, self-pity I could see is like a cancer. Self-pity has no cure. That cancer has to die. That self has to die. And only there that cancer can be cured. Someone said, I've got a splitting headache. Is there an instant cure? Another person said, yeah, go and lie down on the railway track. That's the cure for self. The only cure for self is death. There are so many things you can speak about self. Now, for example, here are a few things, a few branches of the, a few tentacles of the octopus, self. We can see just a few things there. And I may be overlapping here and there, doesn't matter. We see different things. You choose yours. What's your problem? There are certain things that are not seen there. Self-centered, self-exaltation, self-confidence, self-pity, self-will, self-righteous, self-appreciation, self-defense, self-condemnation, and what's after condemnation? Self-consciousness. There is self-condemnation and there is self-commendation also. Self, all different things about the self. Well, I'm not going to explain that. But there's more. Like we studied self-love. There is selfishness. Now, let me explain selfishness. A selfish person will not feel this is just one out of, say, 500 qualities of selfishness. One thing about a selfish person will not feel the pain that the other person is going through. That is why it is always good to go through pain to know what the other person is going through. Another person full of self is feeling, true. Nobody understands the pain I am going through. Now, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the others, so please keep quiet. Now, I'm talking about those who can't show pity to others because they are selfish. It's good for us to go through pain and break so that we can feel for others. Otherwise, we won't feel for them. If you hear somebody has died, a person who has never known the pain of death will say, really? So when's the funeral? That's all it is to them. But death, we need to go through the pain of death to know what another person is going through. Otherwise, we will treat it as nothing. Dear children of God, selfishness makes us think of ourselves and our family, our culture, our language, our people. There's so much about selfishness, but I'm not going to speak much about these things. I'm going to just try to identify a few of the million tentacles of self and try and see if you can see any of them in your life. Much of this is from my own experience, and the self in me is now trying to show how humble it is. Right, now self justifies itself. Self always has an excuse. Self is never wrong. It does not want to be wrong, and it's never wrong. So it always justifies itself. And because it's always right and never wrong, it always has an excuse. But when it is cornered, it gets upset or gets condemned. Self, I'm going fast now, so don't try writing, because I'm going to say it fast. Self always insists. Self always insists. Always insists on its own way, because it's always right and others are wrong. Self insists and has its own way. Self stands up for its rights. It insists on justice for itself. Next, self seeks its own glory by magnifying itself. Then, let's jump to another angle. Self, it gets irritable. It does good, and in doing good, it gets irritated with others who don't do the same good. Remember one sister. We've got two sisters. Two sisters of the same family. Who? I can't see the lights in my eyes. Mary and Martha. Why blame the others? Two sisters of the same family. Okay. Martha. Martha was doing good, but she got irritated. That was the self. Self becomes envious. Self becomes resentful. Self is touchy. Self is critical. Self is worried for everything, unnecessary thing. Self starts worrying about who's going to replace Charles Kennedy. Self starts worrying right from Charles Kennedy to the test on the foundation stones. The self starts worrying and worrying. Why? How many marks am I going to get? Self becomes shy. Self is self-conscious. Self is reserved. Self is possessive. Self is revengeful. Self is bitter and unforgiving. Self talks about itself. Self is impatient. Self is unkind. Self is rude. Self is rough. Self imposes itself on others. Self imposes its opinion on others, and others must concur. Self doesn't care for others. Self doesn't care for other people's feelings. Self will wake up in a camp at 3 o'clock in the morning and wake others up also. And self is short-tempered. And self gets upset. Self starts sulking. Self is disappointed. Self is fearful. Self does not want to be embarrassed in the strong sense of it. The worst part is, we exhibit all these natures, and yet we insist it's not from the self. Dear children of God, I have more to say about self. I've got everything written down so that I don't miss anything. Symptoms. The self is a disease. Some people say, how do you know you have diabetes? You always feel thirsty. You get tired all the time. I'll tell you, dear children of God, the sickness of the soul is something more to be thinking about than the sickness of the body, because the body will die anyway, but the soul will live forever, and where it lives, it's important. So we must know the symptoms of self. For example, I'm going to overlap and touch upon certain things, but I'm just saying it. A person which self will be in the center and has this disposition to look at everything as to how it will affect oneself. Because I am in the center. And there are certain symptoms. I told you, you can't pinpoint self. I can't draw self and I can't color it and tell you the shape of self. But there are symptoms. For example, touchiness. That's a symptom of self. As one person described, what is touchiness? Touchiness is like wearing all the nerves of the body on the skin. And for the slightest thing, this person can take offense. And if it's not invited to a place and others are invited, the self can get hurt. The self gets upset and angry when what it desires is not fulfilled. When others don't bow down to me, the self of Haman, and if it is not honored. And as some saints have, from their own experience, they have said, it is amazing how there are many who profess, who say they are dead to self, and yet they have a terrific sensitiveness at being corrected or slighted. For example, if their talents are not recognized, immediately we feel it. We feel it so much within us. And we will not manifest it, but we see it in the form of thoughts and feelings within us. Now, that is all the self. And yet, these people will insist it is all part of holiness. It's because I'm holy, I'm reacting like that. And another terrible feature of this touchiness is that touchy people can never bear to be rebuked or corrected. A real strong mark of genuine humility is that we can be reproved and corrected, even severely, and we take it with a patient and thankful spirit. I remember once, one brother, he had preached something which was not right, perhaps a bit spurious. And when he preached, the pastors, when they heard of that, they said, we need to correct him. So they called him. And they took him into the room. The pastor said, they started questioning him. We heard that you preached something like this. He said, yes, because I thought it was right. And he was quite strong in his opinion. And that doctrine that he was preaching would bring the whole church to destruction in the end. Now that was wrong what he was doing. So the pastors in great love decided that they needed to correct him. And so they started correcting him. And there were people within earshot. They were listening. When they heard the correction, they said, this brother is going to leave the ministry. He cannot bear this. It's too much. They really are scolding him. For hours, correction upon correction, scolding, merciless correction. After that, the door opened and he came out. And people were watching to see what he would say. He smiled. And he said, I really thank God for mothers who care for me. I thank God for these lovely mothers God has given me to correct me and show me my wrong. The people were so surprised. I tell you, all of heaven would have rejoiced. We may think, what a terrible worker, how he preached something wrong and all that. But the way he took that correction, that was the mark of genuine humility. Truly, he went on to be a great man of God. And recently he went to be with the Lord. We're hearing much about him. His name is Don Stiles. How God was glorified through his life, we are reading in different magazines, and God willing we shall get a book. Self cannot be corrected. When self is alive, there is always self-defense. There's always self-protectiveness because it does not want to die. And as I told you earlier, self, if we have self, we find that we become heavy people in the sense of opinions. We find that in the society where we are, everybody has to adjust to us. Everybody has to bow to us. Everybody has to adjust. And if they don't, there'll be a problem. Because we impose our opinions and feelings on others. Self will push its claims. Self will take 1 hour to say what it could say in one sentence. Self does not think of sick people or how the people are tired. Self scolds other people for its own mistakes. We can see all these are just symptoms of that self-life. And if you're feeling a bit bad and uncomfortable at what I'm saying, I'm not even one bit sorry. For that's the purpose. And I want you to feel more uncomfortable. So let me carry on. Self, I told you, is the problem of spiritual people. Now, all those who consider themselves to be spiritual, now, it's your turn now. Often, we who are spiritual, we recognize self in others. One thing, those who are perhaps having problems with other things which they have not overcome, sin, they are still struggling with sin. But those who have overcome many things of the world, they don't have problem with smoking and drinking and films and worldly life. The problem with self will always be raging. And very often, because of self, we recognize self in others. But actually we recognize very little in ourselves. What we have is like a big log, as Jesus said. The other person may have only a little speck in the eye. That speck for the other person, to us will be something big, but we won't see what is in us. Very often, we recognize self in others. I'm making that statement for the 4th time, because I'm trying to make you understand something. Very often, we recognize self in others. For example, during meetings, especially prayer meetings, people can be very selfish, especially during the singing time. I've noticed how people during the singing time are very selfish. Now, for example, when I'm playing the guitar and I'm singing, now there's a hymn book in front of me and I'm singing. When we have to turn the page, everybody turns his page. Everybody is occupied with his book. They're occupied with their singing. They're just thinking of themselves. They're full of themselves. No one thinks of me. Do you understand? Because of myself, I instantly recognize it in others. Everybody is thinking of themselves. Nobody is thinking of me. So let me teach them a lesson. If I have to turn the page, I'll put my guitar aside, put it down, turn the page with the noise, I'll pick the guitar up and make them realize that somebody else should have done it. Dear children of God, that's one. Number 2, I'm again saying how we recognize self in others. How many of you heard of that Sunday school teacher who taught her children about the Pharisee and the publican? Have you heard that little story? The teacher was teaching her children about the Pharisee and the publican. And she was saying, children, you know these two people, how they went to church? They went to church one day and then this Pharisee was thinking how good he is and how bad that publican was. And she went on telling the whole story. And the Pharisee was saying, thank God I'm not like the publican. Thank God I'm not like the publican. Children, this is the Pharisee. What a terrible man he is, isn't he? The Sunday school teacher was saying. And then she added in the end, thank God we are not like the Pharisee. Look how she was deceived. Thank God we are not like that Sunday school teacher. Did you get that? I hope you got it. Otherwise, please listen to it again. Next, a language issue. Now there is self in language. Self makes us bind ourselves to our own community, to people of our own language, and it fires up that spirit, and that's the problem in many, many nations today. That's the problem, basic problem, but that's the problem in churches as well. It is self. Now suppose there are two brothers, A and B, and they are of the same language, and there's another brother, say, of another language, brother C, and A and B, full of self, they talk to one another in their own language without thinking of brother C, and brother C, full of self, says Amen. It is self that does it, and it's self that gets annoyed with others also. Number 4, it is the husband who is full of self that dominates the family and controls the wife. It is the husband who is full of self who ever has to tell the wife to obey him. The husband who has to tell the wife, look here, I am the husband and you have to listen to me. If he has to make that statement, already he is in the mouth of the octopus and he's about to be eaten. And it's the wife who's full of self who wants to rescue him. She won't submit. So she fights back. Of course, for his sake. Because she does not want him to perish. She thinks of his self, not herself. Let me carry on. There's more to be said about the self. Are you feeling uncomfortable? Dear children of God, as I told you last week, one day God told me, one afternoon it was, before I went to the Nottingham meeting, He brought this to my understanding. I never knew it until then, and it came so strong, and that is ASC, the Attention Seekers Club. Put it on when I tell you. Let's cover that. Now, what is ASC, the Attention Seekers Club? This is something which is a very terrible problem. There's an invitation for us all. Come join the Attention Seekers Club. This is forming an association with your own community. Which community? The attention-seeking community. The reason you need to form an association is because you won't get attention anywhere else. So you see 4 people there. Now, I didn't think of anybody in particular, but that's actually spiritual. The first person, God made me tall. I think you need to switch out this light. See, he didn't think of you all, did he? No, we don't know which is self. Don't think too much. Now, God made me tall. Now, he's so, he's showing himself. And he's hoping everybody can see how tall he is. I'm talking spiritually. That tall could be his talent or his spiritual life. Or he expects wherever he goes that people will notice how good he is and how spiritual he is. And he knows that he's going to get a good name. God made me tall. And go to that little fellow there. His knees are buckling and he's crying. I'm nobody. Look at that person, he's somebody. Look at her, she's a big person. I am nobody. The other person says, I am somebody. But here, I am nobody. Directly the opposite. ASC. You are also seeking attention. You're in the Attention Seekers Club. Go to the last person. He's not anorexic, but I'm saying this is something spiritual. He is one who always hides himself. Now that sounds almost spiritual. But he hides himself, yet he holds a little placard saying, I am not here. Stick it there and say, gold is not buried in this place, and makes you look for gold there. I am not here. In other words, he's showing you how he hides himself. Now, he says, I'm not here, so don't look for me. I know all about self and all that, so please, I'm not here. And thereby he gains attention. And of course, let's go to the chief person there. And I hate attention. And thereby also joining the club. Now, this, I call it AFC. In the world they have all kinds of names, but I came across one particular name which is ADHD. I don't know if you've heard of that. I read it in the newspaper yesterday. And it's Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And this is actually a problem. It's a real problem people are having. Attention deficit. I'm not getting enough attention. Now all these people here, they are attention seekers. To get attention, they will even hate attention. In fact, we may not even know. Is there anybody here not in this club? Anyone not in this club? Sister, you're not in the club? You just got attention there. Okay, but we all must have a competition. We must seek to get out of that club. It's a dangerous club. It's an evil club. The self is so desperate for attention, it will do anything to get attention. It will do anything great. It may not do anything. It will do a big ministry. It will choose not to do any ministry. It will do all kinds of things. But the whole thing is the self is doing it. It will do spiritual things. But remember, the bottom line is this: attention. And the self will not even believe that it is seeking attention. That's the horrible part of ourself. It never accepts that the self is there. Okay, first of all, point number one, if you're in the attention-seeking club. Point number one, or is it two there? One, right. I want attention, so I exalt myself. That is, doing things, promoting oneself. You can do it in your work, you can do it in church. I want myself, I want attention, I want people to admire me, I want people to see that I'm there, so I will exalt myself. Remember, exalting ourselves we can do through so many ways. We can exalt ourselves many, many ways. I'm going to rush through because it's 9:05. Time is really going fast, but let me also rush through. We know very much about exalting ourselves, so we hear it from time to time. But the second one is interesting. I want attention, so I humble myself. Now, this is, I am nothing. I realize how bad I am. And it has a bit of self-pity there. I am bad. You've been trying to say how good you are. Nobody pays any attention. So now you try the opposite. I am bad. At least now will you accept me? Attention seeking. It is for attention that I will humble myself. Now remember therefore, I don't mean humbling ourselves is wrong. We must humble ourselves. But what is the root behind it? We humble ourselves, but sometimes we do it even for attention. Thirdly, I want attention, so I praise myself. How do I praise myself? God anointed me mightily. And we make people envy us. We say things to make people admire us. Now, that's in the form of self-exaltation, but we want praise. I want attention, so I praise myself. I speak good things about myself. Or, we can put others down by noticing their faults. By noticing other people's faults, we put them down, mentioning it, and thereby we get praise for ourselves. Now, I want attention, so I praise myself. But the next one's interesting. I want attention, so I praise my neighbor. Now, we can praise our neighbor, especially among spiritual people. The reason I say among spiritual people, they have reached a certain standard where they think spiritually and they also admire spiritual people. So if you see someone who's constantly praising the others and putting himself down, you will start admiring that person. So we can do that. I can praise my neighbor and put myself down simply because I want you to admire me. The subtle self is there in that also. Point number 5. I want attention, so I look for love. Now, this attention seekers, they are looking for love. They're looking for somebody to love them. And they're looking for special care. Not from everyone, but from someone. Someone should care for me. Someone in the whole crowd. If I stand in one end of the hall, there must be somebody else in the other end of the hall to whom I am somebody. They must look at me and they must say, they must come and talk to me. I want someone to care for me. I want love. I want somebody who can treat me as, someone special. I must be special to someone. I'm looking for love, desperately seeking love. I want attention. Point number 6. I want attention, so I want sympathy. I want people to sympathize with me. I want attention, so I will speak in a sad voice. Speak in a sad voice so that you get some attention. I got into trouble one day. I did very badly in I think it was GCSE. I think I got very poor marks, a low second class, something like 54% or something. And when I came home, my mother asked me, how much did you get? I said, I got 54. Anyway, I didn't think you would get any more than that the way you were studying. I said, Mom, forget it. What's the big deal? 54, that's it, fine, over. She knew I didn't care about it. I went for Sunday school that Sunday, and all were discussing, and I was a teenager, you know how teenagers can be. And there was this girl in my class, and of all things, she asked me, how did you do your exam? Now you know how boys can be when girls ask that question. I said, I did all right. Well, did you get a first class? No, I was cornered. I said, no, I got a second class. Second class? You? I said, yes. Are you sure your marks were right? I said, well, I imagine so. So she turned to the teacher and said, poor thing. She said, yeah. And she was showing me a lot of sympathy. And I was lapping it up like a person who's been in the desert for 20 days. And I put my head down. And I could hear this girl whispering to the teacher saying, oh, he's really feeling sad. I shouldn't have asked this. She said, I'm sorry, Rohit. I said, it's all right. And I sighed, and the teacher carried on. 10 minutes later, she said, I'm feeling really bad about what I did. I think he's going to cry. And the teacher said, will you cry? I said, I'll try not to. And I carried on. I'll tell you, you can get into an emotional trap where you're getting a lot of sympathy for a feeling that you don't have. And if you started it, you won't know how to stop. And I tell you, I was going at 180 miles per hour and I found that brake wasn't working. And she went on until I realized head-on collision coming up. After the Sunday school, she went straight to my mother and said, sister, auntie, Rohit is feeling really miserable. What about? He's got very low marks. Low marks, yes, he's got low marks because that's what he did and that's what he deserved. No, he's feeling really bad. No, not at all. I know how he feels. I'm his mother. No, sister, he's almost in tears. I don't believe you. Come, let's go and talk to him. And I see both of them coming at the same time to me. Now I didn't know what I should do. Whether I should be careless or cry. Have you been in that trap? Have you ever been in a trap where you put on something and you don't know how to get out of it? I'll leave the rest of the story. I want sympathy, and so I speak in a sad voice. Sometimes you get phone calls. Praise the Lord, brother. Some people say, you don't appreciate me now, but you will do after I die. Sympathy. I want attention. Point number 7. I want attention. So, I want to be famous. Becoming very spiritual, fasting, praying. I want to be famous. Point number 8. I want attention, so I want to be admired. That is, we add frills. We add frills, extras to our voice, to our looks. We're not ourselves. I'll tell you who you really are. When you wake up in the morning and look into the mirror, that's who you are. But what you appear to be others, you're somebody else. You know, I want to be admired. Point number 9, I'll pay attention to certain things. I want attention, so I want to be coaxed. I want people to fuss around me. Come on. Come. Come quickly, come. You want that fussing. You know, sometimes people love that, people to fuss over them. Especially, I know that's an Eastern thing. When it comes to food, we love people to fuss over. Come on, you must eat, you must be really hungry. Come on. Please, brother, take a little more. Come on, look, you don't look after yourself. When I went to Brixton and I came in 98 from India, Sister Pauline was there. She asked me, brother, would you like to have a drink? I said, no, Sister Pauline. She said, are you sure? I said, yes. Anything cold, drink? I said, no, I'm sure. All right. Sister Ruth? Yes. Can you bring a drink for Brother Rohit? I said, Sister Pauline, I said, no. No, I know you're from India. We want to be coaxed, don't we? We want people to come and take some more. No. I'm full. Don't put any more. Hoping we'll just put the 2 more spoons there. And if you don't put, what a selfish person. You could have tried once more. And the person, if he's from India who's serving, he'll say, this fellow wants to eat up all my food. Take some more. Anyway. Point number 10. I want attention. So I want to be noticed. That is, I will change something, either make it good or bad, or add some technique, or do something to be noticed. But point number 11 is more interesting. I want attention, so I hide. Now this is special humility called ASC humility, where I go away, I stand alone, and I will be all by myself, so that you will come after me. Do you know about that? I know about one sister. Unfortunately, it's always in sisters. No. Self. Okay. Right. Now, there was one particular sister. We had all gone as a team for some work. And while we were all going around, this sister was always by herself, She was, when we were all here, she would go and sit somewhere all by herself. And I really got worried. I thought there was some big problem. So I was sincerely concerned. And I told one senior worker, not a brother, a sister. I said, something is a problem. She's always like that by herself. The answer was, Pat. Pat came the reply, they said. The answer was, you don't know women. I said, why? There's a problem. She wants attention. So she's going and hiding herself. She wants you to go and call her and say, come, be part of the crowd. She's hiding herself. No, attention is not pushing yourself in front. You can do the opposite. You can hide yourself, all because you want attention. You can give something to me right after the meeting, say, here, Brother Rohit, this is a gift for you. And you can tell everybody, look, I've given a gift to Brother Rohit, look. Now that's getting attention. Or you could do something else. When I finish this meeting, I can find, there's a gift on my chair. Now, how did this come? I wonder who's kept it here so humble, not even putting your name there. Thereby you get more attention. I want attention. Point number 12. I want attention, so I want to be scolded. Have you heard of that one? If you won't praise me, at least scold me. I want attention, so I want to be scolded. So I will deliberately make a mistake, deliberately dress badly, deliberately muck around, as they say. Deliberately do something wrong so that I will be noticed. I want attention, point number 13, so I wear a mustache. Now, that is using nature. You can wear a mustache or you can pluck your eyebrows. You can do so many things. I want attention, so I do that. Or, point number 14, I want attention, so I shave my mustache. Yes, I shaved my mustache the first time because I wanted to look like a film star I admire. You can have a mustache or shave a mustache, but what is the purpose behind what you do? Finally, point number 15. I want attention, so I remain sick. Have you heard of people who want to remain sick because they get a lot of benefits? When they are sick, they get a lot of... What do you get? Attention. You get a lot of attention. You see, this is a club. And it's a problem. It's a frightening club. And we shouldn't be in that club. We must want to come out of that club. We must seek to get delivered from that club. And so, what must we do? We must really cry to God. Anyway, let me just say a few more points about the self. Self. Attention-seeking club. Of course, your permit is yourself. The self in you, the self in me, the self, the soul, it will permit the believer to do anything. It will permit the believer to sacrifice anything, to suffer anything. It will permit us to go anywhere, become anybody, take any liberty, bear the cross to any degree, do anything, as long as it can rule. As long as its will is done. Dear children of God, we know the solution to all this problem of the self. There's only one end. Don't pray, Lord, remove myself. He can't answer that prayer. We have to die to self. But the problem is, dying to self today sounds a very poetic expression. It's almost very romantic, very heroic, very supernatural, saint-like. Dying to self. It sounds so beautiful. We can read about it and think about it and talk about it and even preach about it, entertain, to theorize about, fascinate, to dream about it. But it is very hard to do. Very hard to do. But it must be done. For there is no other way but dying to self. We must die to our good deeds and to our bad deeds. We must die to success and to failure. We must die to superiority and inferiority, both are self. We must die to leading and we must die to following. We must die to exaltation and we must die to humiliation. We must die to our life work, to our friends, to our foes, to every manifestation of self and to self itself. Dear children of God, Jesus said, unless we die, we will never bring forth fruit. Jesus said, if you don't deny yourself, that is denying or crush the voice of yourself, you will always find yourself crying out inside you. Crying, help me, please, I'm suffering. But Jesus said, deny him his rights. Deny him, silence that voice. Then take up your cross, which means let yourself die. Die, suffer, go through suffering. And then finally, follow me. That is, don't give any room for the self to have his way. Do only God's will. Dear children of God, self is the danger of your life. And Jesus said, if I be lifted up, in our case, the eye is always being lifted up. But in the case of Jesus, he was speaking about the cross. And if we also can suffer and die with Jesus on the cross, in Galatians 2:20 we read, it is no longer I. Brother Paul, did you think there were no Bible verses today? I hope you didn't. You know, that's point number 16. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And in Galatians 2:20, he said, it is no longer I. I always understand it as a glove and the hand inside the glove. If there is a glove and my hand goes into that glove. Anybody has a glove here? Give me your glove. Everybody, just Titus's glove. All right. How many fingers does this glove have? 5 fingers. Does it live? Does this glove live? Does it have life? Of course. How do you know if something is alive? It can move, right? It can move. Now see, it's moving. Glove, can you testify? Well, I was alive, but now I no longer live. Yet I move, but it is not I, but your hand that moves in me. I am dead. The glove is dead. But what is the life inside me is not me, but Christ in me. This is our testimony. Dead. If I drop you, dropped. Nothing of my own. But if you see me moving, if you see me living, it is not I, but Christ inside me. It is no longer I. I am dead. I am crucified. Therefore there is no more. There's no reaction. There's no action. There's no exaltation. There's no humiliation. There's no worry. There's no happiness. There's nothing. Absolutely dead. A life of being dead. You can have your glove back, Titus, after the meeting. So, this life of the self. Of course, it's not easy to die. You can talk about it, preach about it. Pastor T, you love the prayer of Francis of Assisi. I didn't like it in the beginning, but it's a beautiful prayer. It's a prayer of selflessness. Grant me that I might not seek that others should console me, but rather that I should console others. Help me, Lord, that I might not seek that others should understand me, but that I should understand others. Help me that I should not seek to be loved, but that I might love others. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning others that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. May God therefore really help us to enter into this life of dying to the self. Dear child of God, it is very, very important, and I'm sure you may be more confused today. It does not matter as long as we die. May God really help us. Shall we stand?